think we're ready to go live. And we're live. Welcome, Wednesday, February 10th, Joint Standing Committee of the Environment and Natural Resources. We are here today to have a briefing about oil tank storage and emissions and air quality from the Department of Environmental Protection, and then some comments from the City of South Portland and also from global partners. Let's start by having the committee introduce themselves. And one thing I'll mention before we get started, we don't intend to take any votes today or put forth any legislation. We are just here for a briefing and an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. So let's go ahead and start with Representative Bell.
Good morning, Arthur Bell, House District 47 over in Yarmouth.
And Representative Johansson.
Good morning. Chris Johansson, House District 145, the 18 organized towns between Bridgewater and Sherman.
And Representative Dudera.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Vicki Dudera. I represent House District 94, the towns of Camden and Rockport, the island of Islesboro, where the mountains meet the sea.
And Representative Bloom.
Yes, good morning. This is Representative Lydia Bloom. I represent the town of York, House District 3. Sorry, I'm on the phone today.
And Representative O'Connor.
Good morning. I'm Beth O'Connor. I represent the fine people of House District 5, which is Berwick and part of North Berwick.
Representative Hanley.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Hanley. I represent District 87, which is Pittston, Alna, Wiscasset, and Randolph. And I'll be leaving this meeting shortly. I have some training I have to attend to, but I'll be coming back. I'll be in and out, but thank you.
Senator Carney.
Good morning. My name is Ann Carney. I represent Senate District 29, which is South Portland, Cape Elizabeth, and a little bit of Scarborough.
Senator Bennett.
Good morning, Madam Chair, fellow members of the committee, public. I'm Rick Bennett. I represent the beautiful, sparkling this morning like an Indian vest with the new snow. It's Western Maine, Greater Freiburg, Oxford Hills, and Lakes region. Nice to be with you.
And my co-chair, Representative Tucker.
Well, thank you. My name is Ralph Tucker. I'm a state rep from Brunswick, Maine, and that's House District 50. Thank you.
And I'm Stacy Brenner. I represent Senate District 30, which is Gorham, most of Scarborough, and part of Buxton. And as per usual, we will be kind to one another as our dogs need to be let in and out of doors and bark, and as cats pop into the screen. Rep Hanley, I don't see your cat this morning. Well, okay. I wasn't sure if he was going to respond. All right, so we will get started with the department, and then we'll move on to our community presenters. I'll pass it on to you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jeff Crawford. I'm the Director at the Bureau of Air Quality Control at Maine DEP. I'm joined this morning by Mr. Eric Kennedy, who is the Director of our Licensing and Compliance Division, and Andy Johnson, who is the Director of our Division of Air Quality Assessment. We're here today to talk about emissions from bulk petroleum storage facilities, but we thought it'd be very helpful to first provide an overview of our monitoring efforts directed at emissions in South Portland and Portland area, and then a brief overview of the air emission licensing process here at Maine DEP. So you just have a little better idea of how we do business. So with that, I would like to turn our presentation today over to Mr. Andrew Johnson, who will provide an overview of air quality monitoring in Portland and South Portland.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Senator Bernie, I'll go ahead and share my screen to show the PowerPoint. tell me when you folks can see that.
We can see it. It's not on presentation mode, so we can see your what's to come slides as well.
All right, here we go. We'll start the slideshow here in a second.
Perfect.
All right, we're ready to go. Well, again, good morning, everyone. As Jeff said, my name's Andy Johnson. I'm the director of the Air Quality Assessment Division. I have been working for DEP and the Air Bureau in the air monitoring field since 1978. So I've got 42 years into doing this kind of stuff. And hopefully that has been helpful as we've tackled this particular issue that's been of a lot of concern to many people in South Portland and Portland. So as Jeff said, here's our agenda for this morning. We've got it kind of broken up into three segments, and we are happy to take questions at the end of each one, or feel free to interrupt us if you have one while we're on a slide. We're pretty flexible with regards to that. So I'm going to start with just giving you an overview of where the air monitoring project is that we started in 2019. And just a little way of background before I go into the slide, I wanted to just let everyone know that this all got underway after DEP was invited to attend a South Portland City Council public workshop on April 16th in 2019. And it was at that meeting that our commissioner committed DEP's support and assistance in helping the city understand its air quality by doing some ambient air monitoring. And we defined our role, our respective role playing early on before our first May 23rd meeting, when we brought all the stakeholders together to start this planning process. And what was really important to me was that both, well, at this time it was just South Portland, and later Portland came on in the end of the summer of 2019, but that this was their project and that they were the owners of this, and that our role was to provide them with any kind of technical or scientific support, and sharing our air monitoring experience with them, and to provide any field or laboratory services to the best extent possible with our available resources. So it's very much a lot of their decision making. We'll share information, and one of the first things I asked everybody at that meeting was, at the end of the day, after we had gone through any effort that we were going to decide on going forward, at the end of the day, what did they want to be able to say about any of the efforts we had undertaken to collect ambient air quality data? And there was a really good discussion, about a half an hour long, that touched on a whole bunch of things. And at the end of that discussion, the simple statement that they wanted to be able to answer is as simple as, is the air safe to breathe? That was what everything we decided going forward about what to monitor for, where to monitor for, how long to monitor for. All of that was informed by getting to the best place we could to answer that fundamental question. And one of the decisions early on was that there are many pollutants out there that we could monitor for, but given the concern with the tank farms, obviously their emissions are mostly in the category of volatile organic compounds. That's the acronym for VOCs. We decided that would be the initial focus. The city was fairly adamant in making sure that everyone understood, and this is the quote that came out of our meeting, is that they were not targeting the industry, but they were protecting the community. And that was in recognition that besides the tank farms, there are other sources of air pollutants in the city, other licensed sources, besides VOCs. And they wanted to just make sure that that was something that was understood as we went about, and helped explain how we made some of our subsequent decisions and where we monitored for VOCs. We also agreed early on that the effort would consist of 2 phases. It's actually up to 3, and I'll touch on that a little later. But the first phase, everyone was really anxious to get some immediate data. And the best way for us to be able to facilitate that was to implement what we would call a grab sampling phase. And what this entailed, and I have some slides we'll go into more detail, but it was, providing citizens with the opportunity to collect a sample when they felt that the odors or they were experiencing any kind of air quality issues. The second phase was going to take longer to stand up, and that was to put into place a number of 24-hour sampling sites throughout the city of South Portland. And that we committed that we would be the ones who would operate those in the initial phases. And then the final one is that we also wanted to have, the city was very important, emphasizing that they wanted a monitoring site in each district. So that was part of, hang on, Mika. Hey, quiet. Sorry about that. So yes, that was an important aspect that we wouldn't necessarily have done just on a strict air monitoring technical basis, but they wanted to show and demonstrate that every district in the city was getting equity or fair treatment in terms of measuring their air quality across South Portland. And then we also committed to developing what at that time we were calling a floater sampling system. It's what we're now referring to as our portable sampling system. And I'll have some more details on that. But we covered a lot of ground in the first couple months of the late spring and early summer to develop this project. So here's some details on the phase 1 grab sampling program. As you can see, this is a photograph of, we had a meeting, training session on June 10th, and we were there to work with the city in figuring out how we're going to make these canisters available to citizens. I don't know that we really had an idea how many people were going to be interested in this, but it far exceeded what we maybe had in mind. I think there were over 40 people that showed up who wanted to sign up for an opportunity to take a grab sample. And so with the existing resources that we had, we made 6 cans available for each week from June to September, 12-week period, so that everybody who signed up had a chance to collect a grab sample. And out of those 6 each week, 5 citizens got a can, and we made 1 available to the fire department. So if they had gotten a call for any kind of an odor complaint or something like that, they would have the opportunity to take a sample. And my knowledge is that they never actually did use any of their cans to actually take a sample during this 12-week period. So we made 72 cans available in total. We had 56 valid samples that we analyzed in our DEP lab. Out of those 72, there were 12 that were invalid for various reasons. They lost the vacuum, or the sample escaped for various reasons. But all of that data, after it was analyzed, it was shared with Maine CDC and with South Portland residents via our website, as well as several follow-up meetings that we made presentations to the City Council on. And so in the photograph, you're just seeing some volunteers that got up, and you just basically hold the can at shoulder height, and you crack open that valve. And depending on how far anyone opens the valve, the can is under a vacuum, and it would take anywhere from 30 seconds to maybe 2.5 minutes to draw in that sample of air. And then they would close the valve and deliver it back to City Hall, and we picked them up on a weekly basis, picked up the sample cans that have been used and delivered a new batch. And the bottom photograph is just showing the chain of custody tag that each can had attached to it. So there was a way for people to document important information about when the sample was collected, and it actually gave us that security on that chain of custody of who had it when and where it went in its whole whole trip of being delivered to the citizen and then finally to the lab. The purposes of the grab sampling effort were varied, and as you can see, it gave the citizens an opportunity to be involved, and they certainly had the interest. We had heard that at that April meeting, and so it was. I thought it went very well in the sense of being able to get them involved and actually doing some monitoring. It was also an opportunity for us to kind of correlate when there were odor incidences or complaints being experienced, how that lined up with any of the data that they collected in the can. Also, it was an opportunity to inform us from where we had identified, with help from the city, where we put our fixed stationary 24-hour sampling sites. Were those in a good spot, and also identify any potential hotspots that we were not aware of that we could go back and visit later. But the important thing and the sort of the only downside of this is that a 30-second to 2.5-minute reading, that data is just not appropriate to be able to compare to any long-term averages or guidelines or standards for health for any of the compounds that we had values for. All of those are either in the hours or days or weeks time limit and up to an annual average, which is what we're using with our ambient air guideline. And I'll give you some more details about that in a subsequent slide. Here's a map of all the grab sampling locations. And so what you're seeing is, I don't know, can you see my mouse as I'm moving that across the map? Okay.
Yes, we can.
So here's the Portland Peninsula, and here's the city of South Portland over here. This gray line marks the boundaries of the various voting districts in South Portland. And all the little red pluses are where the grab samples were taken over that 12-week period. So you can see we had a pretty good representation of samples across primarily districts 1, 2, and 3. That is where the bulk of the grab samples were taken. And then I'll point this out just briefly because we'll see this in other slides, but these pinkish fuchsia colored circles are where the stationary monitoring sites that we eventually established. These were not all in place when this grab sampling took place. But just for reference, starting at the top, this is our long-term monitoring site in Darien Oaks Park. This one over here is the Ocean Gateway site in Portland, across from the ferry the cruise ship passenger terminal. This is West Commercial Street down by the intermodal transport facility. Over here in South Portland is Bug Light. And then this dot here is the South Portland Assessor's Office right behind City Hall there. Here is the South Portland High School location. And this is the central receiving building, which is part of the whole South Portland School Administrative District complex over there. There's a middle school or elementary school, just a whole campus of buildings, but we're on the central receiving building in that location. And last but not least is this site over here in the Red Bank community area. The purple squares are where we have licensed VOC facilities. These are sources that have an air emission license from DEP's Air Bureau. So you can see they're scattered at various locations throughout South Portland here. And then the little coded shaded areas are the 6 bulk per terminal storage facilities that are located. So just to give you a lay of what the map is showing you here for grab samples and sites and sources. Phase 2, it was where we stood up the fixed 24-hour sampling station. So this is where a canister was set to collect a sample from midnight to midnight on a given day. And these are operating on what we call a SIP day schedule. It's every 6 days. And the reason for this sampling frequency and this schedule is that other sites that take these kind of integrated samples, midnight to midnight, across the entire country will sample on these SIP days. So you have opportunities for other kinds of data comparisons, not only in your state, but across the region or across the country. It also statistically gives you an equal number of days of the week. So you're not biased on sampling just on weekdays when people are working versus weekends. You get almost an equal number of Sunday, Monday, Tuesdays throughout the week. So you don't have any bias in terms of your sampling. But as we said, we put one in each district per South Portland's direction. Eventually, Portland had been paying close attention to what was going on in South Portland at the time. And we made contact with them in August, and they were very clear where they wanted to put a couple sites. And so we established those later in the summer and early fall. We committed to run this network once we had what we did is actually establish 7 brand new sites that did not exist prior to this effort. And we committed to run it for a full year after all 7 got up and running. Actually, the first sample date was November 5th of 2019. So that took us through November of last year. And as we know, with the pandemic, it was anything but an average or typical year in a lot of ways for air quality. And we have agreed since then to continue the same level of effort for this year. We'll run the same number of sites at the same frequency, but we do have the use of our portable sampling platform. I'll talk a little bit about here in the next slide or two. So anyway, we're committed to running this again through November of this year. I will mention now, if you aren't aware, but we have scheduled a meeting for February 24th to bring our planning stakeholders together again. So Maine CDC and Maine DEP Air Bureau will be sharing some information and presentations about what we've learned from the data we've collected so far, and just have a conversation starting now to think about what things we would want to consider changing as we go forward. And just have those on the table for future conversations down the road. All of these samples have been analyzed in our DEP Air Lab. And I want to make the point that the reason we're able to do what we've done with this project is because we already had the capability to do this canister sampling. We do it as part of our ozone monitoring precursor work, as well as understanding hazardous air pollutants across the state. So what we were able to do, we could leverage what our existing capability was, and people have stepped up and put in extra effort to accommodate the extra work that this entailed. And when we have a little slide later on about quantifying the effort to date, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But all along the way, we are generating, it takes about a month from when the samples are collected to when we have validated data to share with Maine CDC. And we've got a pretty good routine going now after this first year. So basically pretty much towards the end of each month. So for example, at the end of January, we were able to provide Maine CDC with all of our December analytical results. And that's what we've been continuing to do. Maine CDC has been roughly doing every 3 months on a quarterly basis, summarizing that data and updating their report to the cities. Phase 3 is what we're currently in the midst of. It's underway. The portable sampling platform, which is the PSP acronym, is our ability to take a canister sampler along with a polyaromatic hydrocarbon sampler, PAH samplers, and move it around. We can run it off of line power. We also have some battery capability. We haven't had to use that yet. But this is going to allow us to go to locations where we are getting odor complaints. So we saw some interesting results from the grab sampling. It just a lot of good flexibility to collect samples to supplement what we're doing at the fixed monitoring sites. And you'll see the picture on the right in the on the top photo is a photograph of the sampler. The 2 little candy canes at the top are the sample inlet probe. So one is for the VOCs, the other one is for the PAHs. And this is at a residence on Danforth Street in the west end of Portland, and you can see right across the Ford River there, one of the terminals. So that's just an example of what that looks like. We can put this on a trailer when we have other parameters that we may want to monitor going forward. We'd have an actual portable trailer we could mount these things on and move it around. We have been fortunate through Greater Portland Council of Governments to have been given a AmeriCorps volunteer to assist with this portable sampling effort. And so it was interesting. After we announced that we had this capability to do this portable sampling, we were making contacts with folks who had just recently communicated an odor issue in the cities. And we thought, well, they would be very interested probably, hosting this equipment to take some samples and get some VOC data. And we were not having much luck. Don't really know why, but once we had our volunteer, she did a great job in reaching out and getting the word out through various communication means in the cities. And through an effort of about maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we got enough volunteers who wanted to host this that will take us through October of this year. And typically we're leaving the portable sample there for at least a week, more often like 2, sometimes 3, depending on weather conditions, operating conditions. There are a bunch of variables that would decide how long we want to stay. But so that was a great response to now being able to move this around. I want to just mention that at the top of the slide there, we've been to 4 different residential locations this fall and winter already. So we're working our way through the list. We can move it to any other location. So for example, when we have our meeting on the 24th, if there's some suggested areas that the city would like to have us go look at, we can intersperse those with any of the ones that the volunteer hosts that have come up. So lots of flexibility with this. That was the whole intent of that. It's collecting samples on the same frequency and the same dates as our other samples. We can take samples other than that. We did do that on the Danforth Street. We had some favorable meteorology that we thought would be good to collect a sample other than on the every 6-day schedule. So again, more flexibility. This other aspect of phase 3 is continuing to install these meteorological sensing units. They're made by Rainwise, a company that's located in Trenton, Maine. We started this last year, but we had a huge technical challenge issue to overcome where these samplers, the meteorological sensors communicate their data through a mobile data stream. And there were issues with the card that provided that capability. We worked with the company for months and with Verizon and US Cellular to remedy that. We finally have that resolved. It took way longer than we were ready to look at another vendor, but it finally paid off. We've got that resolved. And so we have 4 of the sensors located at sites to date, and we'll be implementing those, the other remaining 4 going forward. We also have a PAH sample, that's the polyaromatic hydrocarbons type of VOCs in the portable unit that you see up here in the upper right. We have 2 more that have been built, and we will be deploying those at 2 of the fixed monitoring site locations. That will be a topic for conversation when we meet on the 24th about where we think the best place to go to locate those will be. You've kind of seen this when we did the grab sampling map, but this is without all of the red pluses there. Again, it's the same layout of circles representing the fixed monitoring sites, the squares licensed VOC sources throughout the cities, and the tank farm areas in color. So after our first full year of monitoring data and sharing it with Maine CDC, they have generated a report and shared it with the city managers for both South Portland and Portland. Of all of the 50-something compounds that we provide results for, there are 2 that over this annual period of time, 12 months, that the cumulative average at the locations exceeded an ambient air guideline. So just to orient you to this chart, here on the left y-axis is the concentration of the samples, the averages. Across the x-axis here on the bottom are the various fixed monitoring sites. There's the 5 here in South Portland and then the 3 here in Portland. Here's the ambient air guideline. What that basically means is this is a level that has been set that below which you would not expect to have any kind of health impacts observable at all. Above it, you would. And so the only two compounds that were exceeding their AAG is this one for naphthalene. What you see with these little whisker plots here is the average bounded by the confidence interval. So where you see a very tight or narrow range in the limits of the values means that there's a lot of certainty in that measurement that it's in this ballpark of this average. It also means that
Can I just get a clarification on that? Apologies.
No problem. No problem.
Thanks. What do you mean by the confidence interval precisely?
So what we mean is that within these bars where you can see at the across on the y-axis what that level is that we're saying with 95% confidence that it's no lower than this and it's probably not any higher than that. And this is the average in between those confident levels.
Got it. Thank you.
And then down at the bottom, you'll see the sample size. Typically, the more samples we have, the tighter the variation is across the sample results. As you can see, West Commercial Street, we have the fewest samples. It seems to have the widest variability. It's also just, so it's a function of how variable the data is that we've collected over this time period, as well as the number of samples. So in many cases, the sites are showing that they are above this. And this is one of the things that we will be looking further into as to what is contributing to that, as well as how do we address it. And then the second compound that we have of concern is for acrolein, or acrolein, however you want to say it. Here's the same kind of chart, and it's the same premise. The AAG is very low down. And the way that this is derived is using what EPA provides for risk factors for various compounds. And there's another reason that Dr. Andy Smith, when he gave a presentation to the City Council back in November of 2019, we've got really good human health data for this compound. And so they can, with a fair degree of certainty, pick a level that they believe would be protective of public health. However, California has developed an equivalent in AAG for acrolein that is higher. And there's some debate because EPA in some areas of their air quality work use the California level to do modeling. And others, they use the one that is represented here. Basically, what it would mean is that instead of being, this high above the AAG, if we opted to go with the California risk level inputs, they'd still be above it, but not quite as high. That's all. So it's still a pollutant of concern. And the other thing I want to mention, and I'll show you a map coming up, is that we find these same equivalent levels across the entire state. This compound is not unique to South Portland or Portland in terms of its levels being above the ambient air guideline. We see this statewide. And so my last slide is just to kind of quantify the effort to date for you folks. The map you're seeing here on the right, these blue plus symbols are where our statewide hazardous air pollutant networks are located. And so you can see we have a site in Presque Isle, there's one in Bangor, Rumford, Lewiston, and our Deering Oaks site there in Portland. So it's at all these sites across the state that we see occurring levels above the AAG. So it's a statewide issue. So this is just a summary of the resources that we've invested to be able to make this project a reality. So we bought components to build 9 canister sampling systems. We found that buying the parts and making them ourselves is a more reliable sampler at a whole lot less cost. We've had very good success with that. We had to make 48 canisters available for this effort. At any one time, there are 24 cans in circulation. There's a set at the sites, there's a set at the lab being analyzed, and there's a set being cleaned to just continue this, 3-component cycle. So you need, at least that many canisters to do this and do it well and accurately and with some confidence in time. What timing? We bought the Rainwise units. They cost about $2,000 each. And this is our analytical cost to date, that if South Portland or Portland had to take these samples and take them to a private commercial lab somewhere and have them analyzed for the same kinds of data that we're providing, based on, and I'm using a figure from EPA where they have a contract for states to buy into if they don't have their own lab to have this analyzed. This is where this price comes from on a per canister basis. It's about $513 a can. So if you add up all the samples that we've taken over the past year, this would be the equivalent analytical cost if it was being done by an outside lab. But fortunately, we have that capacity at our DEP Air Lab. And so to date, our total investment, if you will, is over $400,000 to support this project. And what that means is that we have had to put things on the back burner for other areas in the state that we might have had an interest in and desire to want to go do some investigative sampling, that kind of thing. But this was a priority. It remains to be a priority. Again, I can't emphasize enough, we just leveraged as best we can what we already have the capability to do. I also want to strongly make note of the contributions to our stakeholders, that both the city of South Portland and global partners each contributed $15,000 early on in 2019 to support this effort. And we used that money to buy a backup or a second GC mass spec analytical system. And we leverage that with our own capital dollars to make the whole purchase, because it's over $100,000 to buy that system. The reason I wanted to do that is it made me really nervous that so much of this project of being able to collect a valid year's worth of data was hinging on one system. And we know things happen. And if we had a big interruption in the data set that we didn't collect enough valid data, we wouldn't have a valid annual average to share with Maine CDC, and we couldn't with any confidence say that this is what the value was at a given site. So thanks to those contributions, that allowed us within our limited capital dollars to be able to purchase and install. It's actually in the lab now, and it's running. It took about a year to make that happen. But now we have the fallback of being able to have 2 systems available to us, so we can keep the data flowing without any interruptions. That's the goal. And then the last point is the amount of in-kind staff time and resources that have been devoted to this over the long, a good year and a half now, is just priceless. I have to give our staff credit and everybody, the collaboration that we've had with all of the partners in doing this. This wouldn't have been possible without everyone, really stepping up and wanting to provide the kind of information that was felt that was needed to be able to answer that question: is the air safe to breathe? So with that, I'm done with my piece. And if anyone has any questions, And if not, I'll pass it off to Eric, but I'll stop talking.
I do believe there are a few questions. Perhaps we could move into a stopping the screen share for a moment so we can all see each
Sure.
other for that exchange. And I'm going to recognize Representative Tucker first, and then Representative O'Connor, and then Senator Bennett.
My question for the presenter, Mr. Johnson, is whether the harmful exposures to VOCs that are being measured in this testing or potentially being measured, are they congruent with the degree of the smell? In other words, as the smell increases, is there any congruent relationship between what might be harmful and how much the smell is, or are they independent of each other?
It's a good question. It's one of the ones that we had an interest in trying to answer and understand. Based on the grab sampling results, let me start with those. When we looked at that, there was no correlation. When some of the samples that came back with a chain of custody tag and notes made, they were often asked to describe the intensity of the odor at the time they were taking the sample. And ironically, some of the ones that said it was the worst smell, it was nauseating, whatever, those had some of the lowest concentrations we found. And then conversely, when people reported no odor, we had some of the highest concentrations, and then everything in between. So to answer your question based on the grab sampling data, which was just, again, 30 seconds, maybe 2.5 minutes long, there was not. We have continued to work on looking at the most recent complaint databases from both South Portland and Portland, along with our data. And that will be a presentation that we'll share at our February 24th meeting to see if we can identify any kind of a correlation between those high values and odor reports as well. So
Thank you.
Something that's still being looked into, but it's definitely a question that we would like to share the information with everybody about.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Representative O'Connor.
I'm not even sure if I'm putting the cart before the horse because I'm really new at all this, and even pronouncing some of these names is difficult. But I'm assuming, and sometimes you shouldn't do that, the tanks that these emissions are coming from I'm assuming these are very highly regulated. Is that correct?
I'll let Eric and Jeff answer that, but I would say yes.
Thank you. So, and also in my question as well, if there is a way to, I am assuming that like with natural gas, that these smells, the petroleum smells that are coming out of there for these chemical compounds are not like for natural gas, they put a scent into it because there's no smell. I'm assuming these are the natural smells that come from that. And if that is the case, and these tanks, is there any way to upgrade them that isn't a huge detriment and costly to business? And those are all my questions. And I think those are all my questions for now. Thank you.
Well, I'll try to take a stab at the components of it. So yes, the naphthalene as a VOC is a component of some of the products that are stored and handled by the tank farms. It's also emitted from a wide variety of other sources, but truly those, the tank farms would be a definite source category of them. Acrolein it's usually a byproduct of combustion, typically, but it also is a result of the degradation of more complex VOCs that degrade over time. And acrolein is like the third step in a degradation process. So it just can occur from more primary compounds, but they will degrade over time and form acrolein as well. So that's what makes trying to, do source apportionment or tying any molecule of one of these compounds to a source really challenging. It's really just, our approach has been to use as many tools as we have available: air monitoring, computer modeling, emissions inventory. everything to just keep putting pieces of the puzzle together to see how clear we can answer some of these questions. But they are complex. I wish there was a simple answer. And I think as far as the regulatory piece or the licensing piece, I'll let Eric or Jeff comment on trying to answer that one for you.
Thank you.
Senator Bennett.
Are we not going to get an answer to that question though?
Are you, gentlemen, is that part of your presentation going forward?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is Eric Kennedy. That will be a bit of a later presentation. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thanks. My question, yeah, thanks. My question relates to so you've got 7 sites in South Portland. You've got 5 sites elsewhere, one of which I think is in Deering Oaks, right?
Right. There are 3 in Portland and then 5 in South Portland. So a total of 8 as part of this project network.
Okay, and then you have 5 others around the state.
Well, 4 others. Yep, 4 others.
4 others. Okay,
including the Deering Oaks.
How do those 4 others that are not proximate to the tank farms and to the South Portland experience, how do those? What do the results show for those VOC monitoring stations?
It varies. Yeah. No, it varies by compound. When we have been looking at the statewide HAPS data over the years, we have been aware of the acrolein issue in the last few. And we've now taken a look at them specifically comparing it with naphthalene as well. And we're finding that interestingly, Presque Isle is showing ambient levels equivalent to what we're seeing in South Portland. And we don't really understand why that is. But for 2018 and 2019, that site's annual levels for naphthalene were also above the AAG. We expect to have 2020's data hopefully by the end of this month. And so we'll have 3 years to see how that's changing. But we have the results, to answer your question, looking at the statewide network, there have not been any of the compounds that raised any concerns in all those years that we've been monitoring. It's a good 10 or 12 now that we've had that 5-site network up.
So you're saying that the results from the South Portland area are out of bounds compared to what we're seeing in the rest of the state?
For some compounds, they're showing it being higher.
Which
yeah.
are those compounds precisely?
I don't. 1,3-butadiene would be one. Benzene would be another. Those compounds are also elevated at other sites. These other locations, Senator Bennett, that we saw on the map, they were specifically located to represent mobile source emissions. So they're in heavily trafficked areas. And so we would expect to see more compounds related to gasoline combustion and diesel combustion because of the traffic. That was their intent, was when you look at our emissions inventory in the state, mobile sources are our biggest source category. And when we wanted to collect hazardous air pollutant data, we thought, well, that's the area that we want to most try to characterize when we started this out. So those, if we were to move those at another location, depending if it was a point source specific, we might have different results for different compounds. But over the years, for looking at the mobile source component for these sites, that none of them exceeded AAGs, fortunately.
So what I guess I'm getting at is trying to understand if there's a control group, if you will, right? And it sounds like we don't really have that. You've sensibly spent dollars trying to track down areas that you think might be a problem. Is that a fair characterization, rather than looking at like putting them out on a random basis around the state to see what in Maine we have for an ambient collection of these or an ambient reality with these various compounds?
Yeah, the 5 sites that we have statewide, we consider that what we call a trends network. Yeah. So the purpose was to collect data year after year and see how things were trending over time. There's a lot of value in that information. Again, based on limited resources, we haven't had the ability to go much beyond that. But when we committed to help South Portland and Portland, with the monitoring this project, we've cobbled together resources from different pots of money to kind of,
Sure.
expand our capability. There's always more questions and locations we'd like to do this in.
Well, it would be really helpful for me to understand exactly how out of the norm relative to the rest of Maine that these South Portland stations are. And if you could provide the graphs of what you have that compare to the graphs of those 8 stations in Portland, South Portland, that would be really interesting to see. Is that something you can do?
We certainly can do that.
Thank you.
I'll just mention, if you have any access to on our website or looking at the Maine CDC report, the Deering Oak site is part of that original 5-site network, and it is not seeing the same kinds of levels that the other 7 sites are. Partly that's because of where it's located in the city, and as well as meteorology. Yeah. So as a kind of, your point is well taken about a control site. We have lots of data, a history from that site. It is serving as what in my judgment, would be what the representative background is across the rest of the state. Yeah. It has trended with the other 4 over the years very closely. And it is just not seeing the same levels in most cases that all the other 7 sites are.
Okay.
So that I would, if it helps you interpret the information, that would be the one to look at, say, okay, this is the baseline of the control site. How does that one compare to the other levels that we're seeing at the other 7 sites?
Great, thank you. I would like to see that data, though, if you could provide that to the committee.
We certainly can.
Thank
and
you.
Should we send it directly to you or to Senator Brenner to distribute to the rest of the committee?
You can send it to Mr. Tartikoff and he'll disseminate it to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the information.
Representative Johansson, do you still have a question that you'd like to ask?
No, I also was quite alarmed to hear similar values were being found in northern Maine and Presque Isle, especially. But that question's been asked, and I guess we'll get that information later. So thank you, Senator Bennett.
I have one question before we move on. I'm curious if you can speak to any measurements of emissions, VOCs, at the other tank farms in the state.
We have not done any ambient monitoring. Basically, Searsport is location where there's the next biggest concentration of that. We have not taken any measurements of that, and I'm not aware of any plans to in the near future. Again, we would have to take some of our existing resources and relocate that if that was something that was felt important to do, absent any other resources that might be directed our way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Mr. Crawford, Mr. Kennedy, I believe one of you will be proceeding.
Yep, this is Eric Kennedy. And Andy, would you mind sharing the presentation again? Thank you. Good morning, Senator Brenner, Representative Tucker, members of the committee. My name is Eric Kennedy. I am the director for the Division of Licensing and Compliance. I've been with the department, this is my second stint actually with the department, but for a total of about 14 years now. Also have some experience in the industrial area. I thought it might be helpful, and we thought it might be helpful to give the committee just some background information on the licensing process, where that authority comes from. And this gets a little bit to Representative O'Connor's question about how heavily regulated are some of the sources around the state. So beginning with federal authority for regulating air pollution comes from Congress enacting the Clean Air Act with the basic structure established in 1970. And with major amendments of the Clean Air Act occurring in 1977, and then most recently in 1990. Our state authority to license both minor and major sources of air pollution is contained in chapters 115 and 140, which are both part of Maine's state implementation plan, which is submitted and approved by EPA to attain and maintain compliance with national ambient air quality standards, as well as to prevent degradation of existing air quality. Next slide, please, Andy.
I'm trying.
Okay. There we go. One too far. There we go. Maine's air licensing program addresses both major sources and minor sources. Major sources are sources that either emit or have the potential to emit pollutants at levels greater than the major source threshold levels, which are generally 100 tons per year for most of the criteria pollutants such as particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide. But for VOCs, that level is 50 tons per year. A new major source of an existing or an existing major source proposing a major modification must apply for a license to construct under the new source review provisions, which are contained in our Chapter 115. Major sources must also apply for an operating permit, also known as a Title V or Part 70 license, in accordance with Chapter 140. Minor sources, on the other hand, are subject to only one licensing program under Chapter 115, but that program addresses both construction and operating requirements for those minor sources. Next slide, please, Andy. Maine's licensed sources are subject to any number of control requirements, including what's known as lowest achievable emission rate, or LAER. And I'm sorry to bombard you with some of these acronyms, but we have no other names for them. And LAER is applicable to new major sources and major modifications involving significant emissions of either NOx, nitrogen oxides, or VOCs. And BACT is applicable to all other criteria pollutants. BACT requirements also apply to new minor sources and minor modifications, whether it be a major source or a minor source. The biggest difference really between lowest achievable emission rate and best available control technology is that lowest achievable emission rate control evaluation does not allow for cost to be considered in determining the best level of control. Whereas best available control technology, or BACT, does allow the consideration of energy, environmental, and cost impacts to be considered when evaluating various levels of control. Other federal and state control requirements come from both federal and state laws and regulations, but they include things like new source performance standards, national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants, reasonable available control technology, which is a evaluation of again, nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds from sources that have significant emissions of either of those pollutants. Best available retrofit technology is another thing, control evaluation that involves impacts to visibility and reducing those impacts to visibility from major sources of particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. We also have, under federal rules, sections 129 and 111D of the Clean Air Act that pertain to solid waste combustion and other source categories that are regulated under 111D provisions. Best practical treatment, or BPT, is a control evaluation that we use from a state level basis in our licensing efforts to establish control requirements for existing sources. So not new sources, not major major modifications or minor modifications, but for existing sources that haven't had any type of modifications involved. And many other source category specific requirements contained in either federal statute or federal law or state statute or federal or state regulation. Next slide, please, Andy. This chart shows what the public participation requirements are for the air emission licensing actions for major sources under both the new source review licensing provisions and the Part 70 licensing provisions. In these areas, public participation opportunities exist on both the application and draft license stages of the licensing process for new major sources, major modifications, initial Part 70 license, and renewals of Part 70 licenses. And Part 70 licenses are renewed so once the initial Part 70 license is issued, it is up for renewal after 5 years. Next slide, please, Andy. This is another chart, but this is showing the public participation requirements for air emission licensing actions for minor sources under our Chapter 115. Public participation opportunities exist upon submittal of an application for all but an application for a minor revision of a license, and on the draft license and for any major modifications to a minor source. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here, this is where Mr. Crawford will be taking over, so I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have on the licensing side of my presentation.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Representative Tucker. You're on mute, Representative.
I'd just like a little clarification here. Are we basically operating as a subcontractor for the federal government here in our state DEP? Are
Yeah,
you basically,
that's, oh, I'm sorry.
Could you explain that relationship?
Yes, that's actually probably a pretty good way of putting it, Representative Tucker. We do, as many states do, have accepted delegation for the licensing program. So we accept delegation, we accept the authority for issuing licenses as well as for the compliance and enforcement of the licenses that we issue. That doesn't mean, though, that EPA can't take enforcement action on their own, which they do in some cases.
Thank you.
Senator Carney.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for your presentation today. I was wondering if you could give a little bit more information about the BPT, the best practical treatment standard. You said it was not a federal standard, but a state standard. Can you just describe a little bit more, I guess, how long it's been in effect and tell us the parameters of it?
Sure, please? Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. Yes, best practical treatment is a state level of control review or control technology review and emission standard review that the state performs on whenever a license is renewed. So as I mentioned, for major sources, that happens every 5 years. For minor sources, it's on a 10-year schedule. So for minor sources, every 10 years, that best practical treatment evaluation would be looked at again. Best practical treatment is, it's looking at what the existing facility is and looking at other sources that are similar to that type of source, source category, if you will. And what are other sources around the country and within Maine doing for controls for that type of source category? But it also looks at the cost of installing controls, and it's basically trying to keep our existing sources up to speed with what other similar sources are doing, I guess is a plain language way to put it.
Is that defined in the rules?
Yes, best practical treatment is defined in our definitions regulation, which is chapter 100.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have one question before we move on. Do you have a sense of that you could offhand the number of licenses that you're managing, the new and renewed? What does that rate look like?
Yeah, so obviously with the major sources being on a 5-year schedule and minor sources being on a 10-year schedule, it's not always the same every year, certainly. But we have on the order of about 52 or 53 major sources in the state of Maine. So again, those come up for renewal every 5 years, but we also work with those sources in between renewals if they have any changes that they're making to their license. So we do license amendments throughout that time period as well. Minor sources, we have on the order of over 500 minor source licenses that we issue, and that we, same thing as with major sources, come in for license amendments from time to time between that 10-year periods. And we also, our compliance program, we have a compliance program in the regional offices within the state that looks at reviewing compliance with both minor and major sources on a regular basis, and performing what we call full compliance evaluations on a frequency of every 2 years for major sources and at least every 5 years for minor sources.
And just to follow one additional question, what is the lifespan of one of these oil tanks?
Boy, that's a good question. There are a lot of these tanks have been around for a long time, older than me certainly. I'm sure many of them are much older than everyone on this call. But they do inspections of these tanks on a regular basis. They have to empty and inspect them on at least every 10-year basis. That's the minimum requirement. But yes, there are a lot of tanks that have been around for a long time.
And when do you recall the last new license you had someone file for?
Actually, I guess the most recent new license for a petroleum-based tank facility was actually recently issued to a facility in the Bangor area for a company called Eurovia, used to be called Lane Construction, for asphalt storage tanks. So we have recently done one within the last year, but it's not typical. We don't do many new licenses for petroleum storage facilities.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Crawford?
Good morning, Senator Brenner, Representative Tucker, members of the Joint Standing Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources. I am once again Jeff Crawford. I'm the Director of the Bureau of Air Quality, and like Mr. Johnson and Mr. Kennedy, have some little experience in the airfield. I've been involved primarily with air quality control since the early 1990s, and I am a 32-year veteran here at Maine DEP. I'd like to give you an overview of our study, emissions from bulk petroleum storage facilities. LD 1915, last section, directed the department to the study measures to measure and estimate air emissions from above ground petroleum storage tanks, methods to control those emissions, methods to control odors from oil terminals, and programs for assisting municipalities in air monitoring. Before we go too far, I would like to note that since our public release and presentation to the legislature for January 1st, we did receive from a stakeholder a couple comments regarding some errata. And in the interest of full disclosure, they noted that on page 7, there is a typographical error, excuse me, actually a more substantial error. The statement, residual fuels have a high viscosity and must be stored at greater than 100 degrees and heated to 200 to 300 degrees. That is incorrect. Those fuels are typically stored at 120 to 140 degrees. On page 52, there's a typographical error, and what it should say is vapor pressures between 3.0 and 11.1 as a statement with respect to subpart KB. I'm getting way into the woods here on you. And then finally, this is even worse on page 52, subpart 6B. In a nutshell, not all internal floating roof tanks are required to have secondary seals. We will be posting these errata on our website and also provide them to Mr. Tartikoff for you to review. But did want to get those out of the way before we went too far. There we go. Next slide, please, Andy. Thanks. I guess first of all, I'd like to thank all of the Air Bureau staff for their work in preparing this report over the past year. Those of you who have had the opportunity and a chance to review it, it is very comprehensive. It is very well done. In the development of our report, we gathered information from a wide variety of resources around the country. Some of these included other states. We actually surveyed all 50 states requesting information on their best practices for calculating emissions and for controlling emissions of air pollutants and odors from petroleum storage tanks, especially heated residual and asphalt storage tanks. We actually received responses from 34 states and other local agencies. Just as a note, some states are primarily, their air programs are primarily administered through local agencies. For example, California has, I believe, 23 different local air control districts. As another resource we used was the Texas Backed Control Guidelines. This is the best available control technology guidelines that the state of Texas Air Quality Commission has posted. We used the RACT Backed Lear Clearinghouse. Great acronyms. RACT, again, is reasonably available control technology. BACT is best available control technology. And LEAR is lowest achievable emission rate clearinghouse. Mr. Kennedy mentioned these are reference documents that we provide all of the states and local districts are required to submit their determinations to US EPA. So they actually have an online clearinghouse that licensors and other interested parties can reference to see determinations made in other jurisdictions. We use the AP42. AP42 is EPA's compilation of emissions information and factors for a wide variety of source categories, over 200. The document is extensive and detailed, and is considered EPA's flagship collection of air emission estimation methods. Most recently, I would like to note that the section on organic liquid storage tanks, which would encompass petroleum storage terminals, was most recently updated in March 2020 and is at this point considered an authoritative, up-to-date resource on the types of emissions this study is intended to address. Finally, we reviewed a vast array of state and federal regulations that are applicable to bulk petroleum storage facility, and there is a list in this report. Okay, Mr. Johnson? Thanks. First thing I'd like to go over is just a real brief overview of the two basic types of petroleum storage tanks. There are two types. The first that we're going to talk about is a fixed roof tank. A fixed roof tank is the most basic type of tank, and it's basically a cylinder with a roof. Emissions can occur through two mechanisms, first being standing or breathing losses, and these occur when the vapors inside the tank are heated and cooled in a repeated cycle. Those of us in the business often refer to them as diurnal breathing losses. When heated, they expand, forcing the vapor out of the top of the tank's vents, and when the vapors cool, they pull air in. So we're basically pumping air and vapors in and out. For tanks that store lighter petroleum products such as home heating oil and diesel fuel, this heating cooling cycle is typically caused by the sun. These are not heated tanks. Tanks that store materials that must be stored at higher temperatures, such as number 6 fuel oil asphalt, to make them pumpable, are usually insulated and held at a constant temperature, so the breathing losses are minimized. The other type of loss, next slide please, from fixed roof tank are known as working losses, and these are when a tank is filled and you see the incoming liquid is basically displacing vapors out the top of the tank. So those are fixed tanks. We have standing losses and working losses. The next type of tank is a floating roof tank, and I think people are familiar with these. Floating roofs are designed to minimize vapor losses from lighter constituents such as gasoline, and are required for these fuels. Working losses from floating roof tanks occur when the liquid is removed from the tank, and there are 7 or 8 different types of basic floating roofs. But basically, as the material is removed from the tank, you end up with a little bit of product clinging to the walls on the inside of the tank. So if you look where we see the rim seal on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see a closure device. We end up with a wet surface there. So we end up with some losses there from floating roofs. And then we also have, next slide please, withdrawal losses. So when you pull the material out of that tank, we end up with a wet shell there. Again, after the level drops, that material can be volatilized and be released to the atmosphere. Again, floating roof tanks are almost always mandated for bulk storage of gasoline and similar light products. They're sometimes used for diesel number 2 fuel oil. They're not used for asphalt or number 6 products since they can solidify, and floating roofs simply cannot accommodate the mixers and other equipment needed to keep the product evenly heated. Next slide. We have controls at the equipment. Although we end up with significant source of air emissions from the tanks themselves, there can be emissions when material is loaded onto trucks, and these are at the loading racks. The trucks are loaded, the vapor from the previous product is displaced or expelled. In the early 2000s, licensed bulk petroleum storage terminals and distribution facilities with gasoline loading racks were required to install and operate vapor combustion or recovery units to capture and control gasoline vapors that were emitted from these operations, resulting in significant reduction in VOC and HAP emissions. And this is required at these terminals for when they are loading a truck that previously had gasoline. If in fact the truck is going to be loaded with diesel fuel, that is now known as switch loading. And we have been requiring the operation of control equipment at the loading racks for switch loading at bulk terminals whenever the previous load has been gasoline. Next slide, please. Question always comes up, I think, is how does Maine compare with other states? Based on our outreach and conversations with other states, the methods that we use here in Maine to measure and estimate air emissions from these above ground petroleum storage tanks are consistent with most other states and goes beyond some other states. And the methods we use to actually control emissions are also consistent with most other states. Some petroleum storage terminals around the country do utilize control systems similar to those being required at 2 terminals in Maine, but add-on control equipment either being required or voluntarily utilized to control emissions or odors from petroleum storage terminals around the country are in fact the exception rather than the rule. Next, please. Okay, after our research, the department thought it was incumbent upon us to initiate a number of new measures. Some of these are for controlling air emissions, some are estimating emissions, some are essentially emissions monitoring compliance. The first initiative that I would like to discuss is to require floating roofs on new distillate tanks greater than 40,000 gallons. So these are bulk tanks. Please keep in mind that most of the tanks we are generally thinking of here are in the millions of gallons threshold. So 40,000 gallons is not a large tank. And we feel that because distillate is often stored in fixed roof tanks, which can experience both breathing and working losses, and floating roofs are in fact technologically feasible, that new installations should require floating roof tanks to minimize these emissions. We are also going to be prohibiting switch loading whenever it is done. Again, I just mentioned that at the bulk terminals, switch loading is already controlled through the licenses. However, we are proposing rulemaking to prohibit switch loading at any facility that is subject to our Chapter 112, one of our rules. We're going to be recommending that all heated tanks be fully insulated and that the temperature of the material be monitored to minimize temperature fluctuations, which can lead to breathing losses. Again, as tanks heat up and cool down, we end up with losses. This authority already exists in the department's licensing regulations, and in fact, we're already implementing it. Mr. Kennedy mentioned the recent Eurovia license, and in fact, they do have that kind of requirement in their air emission license. We're requiring record keeping of cutter stock. Cutter stock is material that's added to heated petroleum storage tanks at the facility to reduce the viscosity and improve the workability or flow, if you will. The authority for this record keeping requirement that already exists in our licensing regulations, and in fact, again, has been included in a couple recently issued air emission licenses or amendments. We will be including this as appropriate in the licenses of other petroleum storage facilities. And then finally, we are recommending the evaluation of the operational effectiveness of mist eliminators and carbon bed absorption equipment that is currently planned at 2 main facilities, and to determine whether or not this equipment should be required in other heated, fixed roof, residual, and asphalt storage tanks. The Bureau of Air Quality already has authority as part of our licensing regulations. Mr. Kennedy mentioned best practical treatment and has notified the facilities of our intent to gather more information on these systems. Just as a little more background, as a member of the committee may remember, the global facility in South Portland is part of a federal consent decree with US EPA is in fact putting on a mist eliminator and has voluntarily offered to put on a carbon absorption system. And the recently finalized consent decree between US EPA and Sprague in South Portland also requires the installation of not only mist eliminators, but also a carbon absorption unit. So we should have a pretty good idea how effective these units are, not only at controlling odor, which is what their intended purpose was, but also in controlling VOCs. Next, please. Controlling odors. There's limited information really on the use and effectiveness of existing odor control technologies. Therefore, the recommendations of this report are going to focus on additional evaluation and data gathering. As I mentioned, we will soon have 2 facilities with operational odor control technologies, and with their debut will come an opportunity for us to measure their effectiveness. Data showing emissions from the subject tanks and how those emissions are affected by mist eliminators and carbon absorbers will help provide important information to inform possible future requirements. Again, just as an aside, facility in Providence has in fact installed mist eliminator and carbon absorbers, and in conversations with counterparts in Rhode Island, those seem to be pretty effective at reducing nuisance odors. Next slide, please. How to best determine emissions. LD 1915 also directed the department to study the methods available for estimating emissions from bulk petroleum storage terminals. We concluded that the calculation methodology contained in EPA's most recent or current AP 42 is the most accurate and widely accepted method for estimating emissions from floating roof gasoline and distillate tanks. Again, these are the lighter fluids. It is not possible to physically measure emissions from these tanks due to their configuration, and because there's no distinct vent or way to create one that would allow for direct measurement. So we're going to continue to use AP 42 for emissions estimations and reporting for gasoline and distillate. We believe that it may be possible to directly measure emissions from heated fixed roof tanks that contain asphalt number 6 fuel oil. The department will use its existing authority to require bulk petroleum storage facilities to conduct emission testing for new or modified heated petroleum storage tanks greater than 40,000 gallons to establish site-specific emission factors that may be used for annual emission reporting and determining compliance with licensed emission limits. For example, a recently issued licensed amendment for Sprague facility in Searsport allowed them to either do their own site-specific testing or to utilize site-specific testing that was conducted by US EPA back in the 2012-2013 timeframe. So we recognize that for these products, that site-specific testing is in fact the gold standard. We will continue to use and accept the most current version of AP 42 emission factors when site-specific testing has not yet been conducted. Next slide, please, Andy. As part of our emission monitoring initiative, we're going to also continue our current monitoring study. Mr. Johnson went into quite a lot of detail on that. And I think also of interest from a compliance standpoint, we're going to be requiring forward-looking infrared technology be used at bulk petroleum storage terminals to monitor for vapor leaks around the storage tank, pipings, seals, fittings, in other locations. And we are going to be requiring this on at least a monthly basis with documentation of the findings and associated repairs as appropriate made to the department upon request. We are proposing to conduct rulemaking in our Chapter 111 and include this requirement for bulk petroleum storage tanks greater than 40,000 gallons. There's been a lot of question about fence line monitoring. Why aren't we conducting it? Should it be conducted? Fence line monitoring is basically used primarily for larger facilities. It is a requirement in a number of petroleum refineries in other states. but generally there are few or no emission sources nearby, other than the refinery. In South Portland area, given the proximity of the tanks, along with other sources that are in the area, you know, it's unlikely that fence line monitoring will in fact be a valuable tool, you know, to measure the emissions from a specific location, if you will. Next slide, please, Andy. I'd mentioned site-specific testing. We have in front of us a mist eliminator, and I don't know if I can show, Andy can show his, use his cursor. Basically, you see a vent pipe coming down from the top of the tank. To the right, Andy. There we go. That would be an inflow to your mist eliminator, and then an outflow to the left. So what we will be doing is requiring sources that have installed these devices to measure emissions going into the odor control and going out of the control. By having both an upstream and a downstream point of reference, we'll be able to measure the effectiveness in controlling VOCs and HAP emissions. If in fact, again, if this proves that there is a demonstrated reduction in VOCs, we are proposing that will be required as best practical treatment for these facilities. This emission testing will be conducted by a third party, and the sources will have to submit an emission protocol to the department, along with details of how the testing will be conducted, and then we'll actually work with the facility and observe the emission testing on site. All right, thank you. Next steps. So measure a number of things we want to do, a number of things we are doing. So we're going to be proposing revisions to the department's Chapter 111 Petroleum Storage Vapor Control Rule to require monthly leak detection repair using forward-looking infrared camera. Propose revisions to the department's Chapter 112 Bulk terminal petroleum liquid transfer requirements rule to prohibit switch loading. We're going to evaluate the effectiveness of mist eliminators and carbon absorption control equipment in reducing VOC emissions. And if the technology is proven effective, we're going to require this as best practical treatment to control VOC emissions from heated petroleum storage tanks. We're going to continue monitoring local air quality in South Portland to assess the impact of odor controls on air quality. We're going to investigate the elevated levels of acrolein and naphthalene at other sites in Maine, including Presque Isle. And we're going to implement other terminal initiatives through the air emission licensing process. That concludes my presentation, and I would love to entertain any questions the committee may have at this point in time.
Senator Carney.
Thank you very much. You've given us a really impressive description today of the work that you've been doing since, well, actually for nearly the last 2 years. And I want to thank you for all of your hard work. I really appreciate that you began your presentation with the fundamental question we all want to answer, which is the air safe to breathe? And also want to point out that while this is a question that really has been the focus of a lot of work done in South Portland, it affects everyone in Maine. We want all Mainers to have clean air to breathe, and there are these oil terminal facilities located all along Maine's coast. You have done a lot of work. I really appreciate the regulatory initiatives that you described, and I'm especially heartened to hear you talking about site-specific testing and to observe that that's the gold standard, because I know for myself, I have real concerns about the correspondence between the results of the AP42 analysis and what we'll find if we do the site-specific sampling. And so I just wanted to point to a couple of policy issues that I would like to recommend that the committee consider. The first being that we do take on that site-specific sampling and testing so that we can understand what's actually being emitted. And once we understand what the actual emissions are, I think that will even sharpen our policymaking focus. I'm also concerned about the issue that a lot of the advocates have raised about taking into account the cumulative effect of the emissions from the oil terminal facilities. I think members of the committee saw on the map that there are quite a few oil terminal facilities located right in the midst of a densely populated area with schools and daycares and workplaces in South Portland. And we have received from some advocates a proposal about the HEM3 model, which takes into effect the cumulative impact of multiple facilities. And I would like us to continue to work on evaluating the best way to take into account the cumulative emissions rather than the site by site when sites are situated so close to each other. And then also, I would like to see us look at a way that we can collaborate with other departments within state government to connect the emissions work that we're doing in our committee with the public health issues so that we can really understand and shape our policies to address not only sort of the quantifiable emissions issues, but to really to connect that to the health and safety of our residents. And so I just wanted to ask you and express appreciation first for the work you've been doing, but also ask if you'll continue to work with us to achieve a yes answer to that initial question, is our air safe to breathe? Thank you.
I think, first of all, thank you very much, Senator, for strong words of praise. Again, I can't say too much about Bureau of Air Quality staff. They just spent a lot of time on this, and I think they did a great job. You know, with respect to working with the committee, absolutely. I mean, we want to get to the same point you do, and I think we want to find the same answers you do. You know, there are a lot of advocates in the South Portland area that are concerned. Again, is the air safe to breathe? What are the cumulative effects? And I think working with some of our sister state agencies, most particularly the Center for Disease Control, hoping we can get those answers to the committee and to the people in the region.
Thank you.
Representative Johansson.
Thank you, Senator Brenner. Mr. Crawford, when you use a standard that it's safe to breathe or safe for humans, where does that standard come from? Who sets those standards?
For most pollutants that the Air Bureau deals with, you know, we're talking about national ambient air quality standards under the Clean Air Act, things such as ground level ozone, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide. So there are actually standards that the federal government has. For a number of years, the state actually had its own standard that was more stringent. Our standards now, in fact, align with the federal government standard. So is the air safe to breathe for criteria pollutants, we call them? Yes. Is the air safe to breathe with respect to some of these hazardous air pollutants? Mr. Johnson spent some time noting that we have issues with both acrolein and naphthalene in the South Portland area, and Presque Isle as another area in specific. All we can say is that it is definitely a concern to the department. I can't say at those levels how unsafe that air is to breathe. That's really an issue I would have to defer to Center for Disease Control. But as Mr. Johnson pointed out, at concentrations above those ambient air guidelines, we can no longer say that there are no health impacts.
Thank you, sir.
I can't tell you what the health impacts from the concentrations we're measuring might be. I hope that helps.
It did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little confused about this question that Representative Tucker raised regarding the delegation of enforcement authority in this particular case. I understand that there's an EPA action here, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that. And I'd like to ask whether you at DEP have a role in that enforcement and how that may dovetail with your own work.
Sure, and I'll also piggyback with Mr. Kennedy in case I don't get any of this quite right, because he is the director of licensing and compliance for us. Yeah, Maine, as Mr. Kennedy noted, in most states do in fact have delegated programs under the Clean Air Act. So there's actually a dual enforcement role. Our licenses are enforceable both at the state level, so we have an enforcement obligation or a compliance obligation, and in fact, if there's non-compliance, an enforcement obligation, and also EPA can enforce separately. So there's a dual enforcement role. Back in 2012-2013 timeframe, EPA required emission testing at facilities in South Portland, the Global and Sprague facility, and also in Searsport, Sprague's terminal in Searsport, to determine actual emissions using on-site emission testing. As part of that testing, they determined that these facilities could in fact be what is known as a major source. And as Mr. Kennedy noted, it's a different licensing protocol, a more detailed protocol. As part of their remedy, what EPA did was proposed and ultimately consummated consent decrees with both Global and Sprague to make sure that the facilities would not trip that major source threshold, if you would. They would stay a minor source and be licensed under Maine's minor source program. The Global facility, for example, they had a restriction on throughput, how many millions of gallons per year asphalt they could bring through the facility, and number 6 fuel oil. They had restrictions on how many days the tanks could be heated. They also had a limit on how many heated tanks they would do. And again, all of these were under EPA's authority and primarily interested in VOC emissions as an ozone precursor. I'd mentioned criteria pollutants and national ambient air quality standards for ozone. Ground level ozone is formed primarily through VOCs and nitrogen oxides. So the control strategies for the last 30 or 40 years have focused on reducing both of those emissions. So that's really what EPA was targeting. However, they also noted that there were odor concerns in South Portland, so they did require the installation of a mist eliminator at the Global facility. Global, again, voluntarily decided to install a carbon absorber, which would be in place after the mist eliminator to provide an additional odor control. They recently finalized consent decrees between EPA and Sprague. The Sprague consent decree actually, I believe, addresses facilities in Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and I guess Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So I think there were 5 facilities. We had Searsport, South Portland, Quincy, Massachusetts, New Bedford, and I believe Everett, Massachusetts, along with Newington, New Hampshire. Similar restrictions with respect to no more than a certain number of heated tanks, throughput limits. Interestingly, for the Sprague facility in South Portland, the consent decree does in fact require the use of both a mist eliminator and a carbon absorber. So a little bit of background. I hope I didn't go too far off your basic question, which was with respect to enforcement, but I did want to give you a little more background on a good part of how we got where we are.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that background, but I guess the other side of my question that I don't think you addressed really is, are you involved at DEP with enforcing any of those or monitoring for any of those outcomes that the EPA has considered in their consent decree? And if so, what are those? And really, are you doing anything further at DEP than beyond what the EPA is already suggesting?
Okay, that's a very good question. As part of their consent decrees, EPA did require certain elements of the consent decree be included in the air emission licenses. So, for example, Global had submitted a license application, and what their license revision would do would be to implement, or if you will, include some of these restrictions in their air emission license. For example, no more than 4 heated tanks containing number 6 asphalt with no more than 2 tanks, or excuse me, number 6 or asphalt with no more than 2 tanks containing number 6 fuel oil. So they can only have 4 heated tanks, and only 2 at one time could have number 6 fuel oil. They had to have at least 120 non-heating degree days in the aggregate. So if we have 4 tanks, that means basically that 30 days of the year they can't be heated. That had to be in their air emission license. They also had to have throughput limitations. For example, 50 million gallons per year of number 6 fuel oil, and I believe it's 75 million gallons of asphalt. So those are included in their application, and in fact, they are in our draft license at this point in time. Their odor control is not included in our air emission license, simply because it was required as odor control and not as a VOC control. The department does not have authority to address odor. So we can address VOC emissions, but not odor per se.
So what happens if they meet all the license requirements of the DEP, but they're still violating the EPA's consent decree?
Certainly EPA would have the principal enforcement authority for their consent decree with respect to the elements that they were required to put in their air emission license. Anything that they violated, we could also enforce against. So the one outstanding issue would be the mist eliminator, if you would. If they don't install that, that would fall upon EPA to enforce on it.
But and they're watching that, I presume?
Yes.
So, okay. So, all right. You can't deny them a license just because they're contumacious with respect to the federal government?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that background. I appreciate
You're welcome.
Representative O'Connor.
Thank you. I don't even know where to begin. About 10 minutes ago, you said when asked that you didn't know if the air was safe to breathe. And that kind of perked up in my head, thinking, so the emissions from these particular facilities, if you so to speak, could these emissions be determined worse than the emissions that we breathe daily from our car emissions, the E10 in our gasoline, and as opposed to E0 and those different emissions that come out? Are these more dangerous, and are we more susceptible to actually hold these compounds in our bodies when we breathe them, so that they accelerate and they build up over time? I have a lot of questions, so
sure.
But that's my first one, and I probably won't go into detail.
Yeah, no, those are good questions, and it is a good question. Is the air safe to breathe? And with respect to the vast majority of emissions or compounds that we're measuring, the answer is yes. It certainly is safe to breathe with respect to national ambient air quality standards. As Mr. Johnson noted, we have elevated levels of acrolein on a statewide basis. So is the air safe to breathe on a statewide basis? We have elevated levels of naphthalene, certainly in the South Portland area, and I believe in Presque Isle area. Is the air safe to breathe? I'm not really qualified to answer that, and it's not a punt, because it's a measure of degree. There's more subjectivity there, rather than simply it's safe, not safe. It isn't a black and white issue. It's a definitely I'm concerned about it. Definitely we need to look further into it, and we need to try to address it. But I think with respect to is it safe to breathe? That again, it really is a question that has to be answered by our Center for Disease Control.
Thank you. That being said, I know that I have read the different laws regarding our air emission studies, and I have seen that in multiple places over the years, those are not being adhered to. For instance, the different chemical compounds that do come out of the different types of gasoline that we put in our cars. So I don't know. I think that perhaps that standard should be looked at, but that is a subject for a completely different day. But I thank you for your presentation. I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Me too.
Thank you.
Representative Dudera.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. I mean, it's troubling that we are finding these levels throughout the state, but can you just speak a little bit to me about the population density? Wouldn't that be a lot more in the city of South Portland as opposed to what we're finding in, say, Presque Isle? I mean, it's still important to have clean air everywhere, but it is concerning that there are so many more people being affected. As we said, schools, daycares, senior citizens, just a higher concentration perhaps of people being affected. I'm just wondering.
Sure, Representative. I think that's a good point. I mean, certainly in, South Portland area, we probably have, if not the highest population density, I mean, among the highest in the state. Perhaps Lewiston's higher, I don't know. But, as far as total exposure to the population, there are more people exposed in that area due to the population density than there would be in Presque Isle. Certainly doesn't negate our need to address issues in Presque Isle or anywhere else that we're seeing problems.
Senator Bennett.
Well, I think that hand up was a residue from a previous question, but I will say that I'm just short of flabbergasted by that last response, because I think we need to, I understand the intent of the question, which is, well, if we're not paying attention, I think it's, if we're not paying attention in a densely populated place, where else might we not be paying attention? But, it seems to me that we ought to have some standards as to what is reliably safe and what isn't. And I'd really like to hear, frankly, from the Center for Disease Control. I know they're busy these days, but this is really important to know what their opinion is about these elevated levels that we're seeing in South Portland and Portland in particular. And I think it would be helpful for me as a new member of this committee to get a sense from them about getting at least some relative perspective on what is, how out of bounds are these numbers that are all elevated above what people are saying are acceptable levels. That would be really helpful. I don't know what the way of going about that. Maybe we could ask Dan to put the query to them and they could maybe respond in writing, but that would be very helpful as we investigate this and other questions going forward.
Chairs have noted your request, Senator Bennett. Thank you.
Could I just mention, Senator Bennett, on our DEP website under air monitoring, there's a big button that talks about the SOPOPO project, South Portland project. And there are links in there to the reports that Maine CDC has issued to the cities that have characterized their assessment of the data to date. So I would encourage you to invite them to come and speak with you. I think it would be very informative. We have an awesome working relationship with those folks over there. We are providing the data. They are doing the basic interpretation of what it means in terms of health impacts and is the air safe or not. So it's a great collaboration, and those reports would give you, it goes much beyond just the two little charts I showed you for naphthalene and acrolein. You'd get a good feel for how they're approaching this and some other takeaway messages that they've shared at this point.
Thank you. I'm on the website now. You said it's under your website under air quality?
Yes.
Yeah.
And under monitoring.
Monitoring and reporting.
And then you'll see a little box in the upper right-hand corner that says SOPOPO project.
Yes, South Portland, yeah.
Click on that, and then a couple scrolls down or so, you'll see links to the reports from Maine CDC.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll investigate that. Thanks.
Welcome.
Representative Dudera.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. I mean, absolutely. We need clean air throughout the state, no matter where. And it's part of our brand. And as we are working here in Maine to attract new people to the state to help us with our economic recovery and our future, clean air is something that we pride ourselves on. That being said, we do have high rates of lung cancer in Maine. We have other things that are affecting our health. So to now add other VOCs into the mix, it's frightening. So I absolutely support that we look at this from a public health perspective and get some data in that way too.
I might just comment on that, that as Jeff mentioned, for the criteria pollutants that the National Ambient Air Quality Standards are set for, we are in attainment of all those. And for the last 40 years, that has been the focus of all these air programs, was to bring the nation's air quality into compliance with those standards. In Maine, we've been successful. Ozone was the last nut to crack, but we finally got there with regional strategies that have helped address that. And I'm foreseeing that there needs to be a shift both on the federal regulatory side for monitoring as well as resources, that there's a shift from this criteria pollutant monitoring to what I term the non-criteria pollutant monitoring. So that includes the hazardous air pollutants, it includes VOCs, it includes aeroallergens. There's a whole host of other monitoring concerns that are out there that are more or less, sometimes they're just issues at the local level, not the widespread pervasiveness and abundance that back in the 60s and 70s that the criteria pollutants had. So I see that shift starting to happen. This project is a perfect example of that. We still have things we have to do. We are required to do. Our grants require us to do that. So we've had, some early conversations with our EPA counterparts about really wanting to bring to the forefront this shift in where the focus now needs to go, going forward. And I'm hopeful that there's good reasons, as you all have just articulated, of why the emphasis needs to be put a little bit more in these areas that have not been traditionally monitored, and use our existing resources to help us get there.
If I could just add one thing that always concerns me and that I see in my business is radon and the prevalence of that in the state.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm grateful for your hard work and for your thoughtful presentation today. We have 2 more presentations in front of us. Let's see, I believe we're going to hear from Global Partners first, and then the City of South Portland. Is there a representative from?
There is.
Dylan, welcome.
Thank you. Apologies for the delay there. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to shut down some stuff on my computer and then share on my screen as well. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can. We can see your whole screen, just FYI.
Excellent. So first, a quick thank you to the committee. Thank you, Senator Brenner, Representative Tucker, and all the other members of the committee for the opportunity to speak. We always strive to make environmental health and safety a top priority, and welcome this opportunity to address the committee. Just a quick background, my name is Dylan Remley. I'm Senior Vice President of Terminal Operations at Global. I oversee all of our terminal facilities from an operational perspective, including the facility in South Portland. On the call with me today to jump in if I make any mistakes and certainly to address technical questions is Tom Keefe. Tom oversees Global's environmental health and safety activities and oversees a team of people that monitor and address those issues throughout the company. Slide. Next, first couple slides are just going to be a quick background just to introduce Global to the committee members who are not familiar with us. First, I would like to say don't let the name confuse you. Although it says Global Partners, we are a family company. We're focused on delivering the energy products and services that families need and use every single day. Global began in the Boston area back in the Great Depression. It was literally a one-person heating oil operation, actually using kerosene at the time. Today, we're a third-generation family-run company. We're headquartered in Waltham, Mass, and we're committed to providing our customers in New England with fuel to heat their homes, power their cars and trucks, and operate their businesses. Just a little background, we've owned the South Portland terminal since 2001, and that terminal has been part of South Portland and part of the South Portland landscape for more than 100 years, an essential part of the work in waterfront, which has helped drive the South Portland and Portland economy again for years. Also just want to emphasize that Global shares concerns about climate change, and we believe we're a forward-looking company looking to the future of energy and transportation. We're working hard on upgrading our terminals and infrastructure to handle greener, cleaner, lower carbon fuels. We are actually spearheading an initiative throughout New England and the Northeast to mandate greater blends of biofuels. We believe great strides are being made in utilizing biofuels across the country and right here in Maine, so that across the Northeast, that the goal of meeting net zero by 2050, that will be a central aspect of doing that. Just in a little bit more detail, we are a leader in delivering biofuels for almost the last 2 decades, particularly in the Northeast and New England. We're actually one of the few companies in the country, we believe, that are handling what's called renewable diesel, which is the next generation of biofuels. And then at the retail stores that we operate, we are deploying a wide array of different tactics to lower our carbon footprint, whether that's from efficiencies efforts to installation of solar, to electric vehicle charging stations, to battery backup installations. This is just a quick snapshot of Global. We have 118 employees in the state of Maine. That includes 8 at the South Portland terminal, and then we have 13 resale stations throughout the state. Again, just quick snapshot of taxes and the impact of the Global terminal in terms of what we supply to the state of Maine. Approximately 65,000 Maine households are heated from the heating oil that's stored at our terminal, and over 800 miles of Maine roads paved. We believe that the products we supply to keep Mainers warm at home and safe on the roads are essential. Nearly 2/3 of Maine households use heating oil or fuel oil as their primary energy source for home heating, which is a larger share than any other state in the country, we believe. Asphalt as a road surface requires about 20% less energy than other equivalent types of surfaces such as concrete, and is one of the most recycled products in North America. Just to sort of underscore where we fit in the Maine and the products that we carry, the American Civil Society of Engineers has given Maine roads a D rating, and they cause Maine roaders to spend an extra $1.3 billion per year in additional vehicle operating costs, congestion delays, and crashes. Keeping the prices of these products stable and available is essential for Maine families and the Maine economy. And that's why we continue to work with the state and the community to make sure we can safely handle the products that people need and use every single day. We want to emphasize that we support the presentation and all the efforts that DEP has undertaken over the last several years. We actually believe it would be hard to find a VOC air quality study anywhere as intensive as to what DEP is currently engaged in. However, given the amount of attention that we global in particular received, I think it's important to provide a little context in comparison. This chart sort of lays it out. I'm going to walk through it. Global is only one small facility among many other larger sources of emissions. I think Mr. Crawford or Mr. Johnson mentioned they regulate 550 major and minor emissions licenses. The vast majority of those have nothing to do with petroleum storage, and obviously global is but one of those 550. If you look at this chart, based on EPA's own data, vehicles are by far the greatest source of VOCs. All of the petroleum terminals in South Portland, and I want to emphasize that all of them are 1% of the total VOCs in Cumberland County. So you're talking about 1% of all the petroleum terminals. And then if you look at global, we are the smallest of those facilities and are only 3% of that 1%. So over 99.9% of the VOCs come from some other facility or some other regulated, some other point of emission source. Consequently, it's Global's belief that the data does not support targeting terminals like Global. And then just to emphasize that as a point of reference, again, for the committee, in a local town nearby, there's one company and one license that's been provided that emits more than 25 times the VOCs of Global, more than 75 times the amount of nitrogen oxide, and more than 235 times the amount of carbon monoxide. And again, I think it's important for the committee to realize the context of where the terminals sit, and then in particular Global, since there's been such focus on our particular facility and our particular company. That being said, we are doing our part to respond to the concerns of the community, and we do take them very seriously. I think it has been mentioned several times. We purchased an odor control system to install and actually then voluntarily agreed to enhance that system. Just to give the committee some timelines, that system was purchased and on site in the summer, fall of 2019. However, we were first required to go through a permitting process with the city of South Portland, a permitting process to actually just approve a concrete pad on which to house the equipment. That process wasn't completed until June of 2020. And upon receiving approval from the planning board to put in the equipment, the city again asked us to wait on installation while they hired an independent engineering firm to review the equipment. In October this past year, the independent engineering firm working for the city informed the city council that the enhanced controls are a demonstrated technology that can capture and control odors, and that the equipment, consequently, we've been fast at work in putting the equipment in place and hope to have it fully operational within the next few weeks. And I think as Mr. Crawford pointed out, we voluntarily have agreed to provide testing and reporting to the state DEP once that equipment's operational, of course. Some of the other things that we've done, I think were mentioned during the state's presentation. We did provide $15,000 to the DEP to actually support their air monitoring efforts. Again, we applaud the efforts that are ongoing. I think they're important for the state of Maine and for the citizens of South Portland and the entire state. We did set up an odor reporting form on our South Portland website and began publishing annual emissions reports to our site. And then we did hire a full-time community liaison to help us be more responsive to the community. This slide is just a couple of the other community level activities that we're engaged in, whether it's donating heating oil annually, which we've been doing again for the better part of 2 decades, sponsoring PSL services, which is a youth and young adults program that supports them with those with developmental disabilities, to being a supporter of the South Portland Food Cupboard, something that's been not just in South Portland, but a number of the communities in which we operate, something we've really focused on during the pandemic. We want to point out that the CDC, and this has been brought up a couple of times, has examined the data collected from the air monitors in South Portland and Portland, and that the VOCs are not at a level of concern for short-term exposure. I think one of the 2 chemicals, or 2 compounds that was pointed out is naphthalene. However, storage tanks like ours are not a significant source of naphthalene. Most airborne emissions of naphthalene result from combustion rather than storage of petroleum products. So when I say combustion, think combustion of gasoline-powered automobiles or diesel-powered trucks and engines. This was explained by the CDC actually to the South Portland Clean Air Advisory Committee on November 9th, and actually pointed out that indoor exposure to naphthalene is typically much higher than outdoor exposure. Common indoor sources of naphthalene include paints, adhesives, flooring, air fresheners, pest control, cigarette smoke, cooking, wood stoves and fireplaces, and a variety of other common household items. So when thinking of health outcomes, just want to point out that the products inside a typical home often have a much bigger impact than the emissions associated particularly with our tanks. And we think it's important to put all this data in context and appropriately size and shape where it stands. Just to put it bluntly, the data indicates that tank emissions are no more significant or harmful to someone in South Portland than the air freshener someone might put next to their litter box. This is just a quick slide, again, sort of emphasizing the point on naphthalene in particular, which I'm not dismissive, and Global is not dismissive about the concern, but again, think context is necessary and appropriate when everybody's considering and talking about this. This is another slide that just emphasizes what I mentioned before in terms of VOCs in Cumberland County, including this data is directly from EPA. And as you can see, non-point biogenics and then mobile sources, which were previously mentioned, are by far the 2 highest contributors to VOCs. As we transition to a low carbon future, we believe the terminals will continue to be essential to the Maine economy. We think to take action without a thorough understanding of the underlying technical issues is something that should not be done. If the concern is improving air quality or public health, we just ask that policy be made upon facts. And again, those facts put in the appropriate context of all sorts of other data and information that's out there, including data on the actual sources of a variety of emissions. We do want to express concern that adding overly burdensome regulations on terminals like Global will have no discernible improvement on public health. We do commend the DEP on the thoroughness of reporting emissions from tanks, but do actually have concerns on a few of their recommendations as unnecessary or overly burdensome. And again, I want to emphasize, we work closely with DEP, both in Maine and throughout the other states in which we operate. They are a regulator. We have great respect for the work that they do and are in almost constant contact, whether it's through inspections, filings of reports, or as Mr. Crawford and Mr. Johnson went through, the licensing programs that we're subject to. Just two of the recommendations, just sort of one that were in the DEP report. One is the purchasing of FLIR camera monitoring, and then the other is the floating roof controls. To our knowledge, those are not required in any other state. We don't operate in all 50 states, but to our knowledge, those two requirements are not required in any other state for distillate tanks. And it's not because FLIR cameras cannot capture actual fugitive emissions, but because of the very minimal emissions that are associated with distillate. I want to emphasize Global's particular facility does not store gasoline. We store distillate, we store asphalt, number 6 oil, and in kerosene, which is a higher grade of diesel/heating oil. We estimate that our 7 distillate tanks, and again, this is for context, with respect to naphthalene, are approximately 2 pounds. So you can see versus that previous chart where you're talking about tens of thousands of tons. Context, again, is something important for the committee to consider. Just a note when it's context, and I think someone at the very beginning of the presentation mentioned that this was about air quality and not targeting a specific industry. I just would like to note on this particular map that the only entities that are called out specifically are the 5 bulk storage or 6 bulk storage terminals in South Portland. None of the other licensed air emissions or the industries or the companies associated with them are identified or called out. And we'd just like to point out that caring about air quality concerns means caring again about the facts. We want to make sure that the actual facts that are coming out from the CDC and DEP are actually utilized when making decisions. We have noted in the months and years in which we've been part of this discussion that they're awful criticized when the facts don't line up with what people want them to say. This is just a quick excerpt from the memo that City Manager Scott Morelli just this month wrote to the South Portland Clean Air Advisory Committee, basically requesting that another year's worth of data should be taken into account to determine what's going on or not going on with respect to VOCs in the air. The collection of more data and actually having hard scientific facts to drive decision making, we think is essential, and we would agree with Mr. Morelli on that point. That is the end of the presentation. Just want to thank the committee. And then I would like to actually just state one piece that came up in the context. I think Senator Bennett may have asked the question with respect to the consent decree that Global entered into with the EPA. Just a little nuance in terms of the facts that Mr. Crawford provided to that. So back in 2012 or 2013, and Tom, you can jump in if I've got the dates wrong, the EPA approached us with data from a company that had performed some studies called Eastmount. And they were the only region in the entire country, the EPA Region 1, which oversees the state of Maine and several other New England states. And they indicated that the emissions from our tanks could be greater than what had been previously licensed and captured. We were asked to perform site-specific testing, I should say, with respect to the Eastmount findings. And it's important to note that the only way on a site-specific basis we were able to replicate the data from Eastmount was to put a vacuum on the tanks and constantly suck out vapors from the tanks, which is contrary to the presentation that Mr. Crawford himself provided, showing how tanks breathe and both bring in air and expel air. At the time, the state DEP, so Maine DEP, rejected that methodology. The greater EPA rejected that methodology. Eastmount, after the fact, rejected that methodology. And the revised AP 42 that Mr. Crawford mentioned, which was just updated by the EPA in 2020, also rejected that methodology. That being said, we did enter into a consent decree with the EPA after a number of years. We'll notice that that started in 2012. The consent decree wasn't entered into in 2019. Without going through the back and forth, we adamantly reject, again, the methodology that was proposed and could not replicated in the field other than circumstances that actually do not in any way indicate how tanks work. And then everything that Mr. Crawford said with respect to the requirements being provided in our license and the enforcement of those requirements is accurate. With that said, a huge thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak, and Tom and I are happy to try to take any questions that you may have.
I believe Representative Connor has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Remley, for that presentation. It was really interesting. My question is, so I noticed that we had agencies here, but UR Global is a private company, and I just wondered why you were the only company here that was here giving this presentation. Were you invited to be here, or did you request to give the other side of the story? Thank you.
We were invited. As to the other companies, whether it's petroleum storage terminals or all the other licensed entities in the state of Maine, I actually cannot comment on, Representative O'Connor, other than again, we were invited. I will say, as to why we might have been invited, we seem to have become a little bit of a flashpoint with respect to VOCs and licensing in Maine, and so perhaps that's the context.
Thank you. Thank you again for your presentation. It's always interesting to the public entities as well as the private entities. I look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
And likewise, we look forward to working with the committee. As I said, we work very closely with DEP, and will continue to do so. We take our commitments very seriously, but as I said, we wanted to provide a little bit of context, sort of where we stand with respect to all of the other industries and activities in Maine.
Thank you.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you so much. Mr. Remley, I really appreciate your being here. For whatever invitation you were received, I appreciate your coming before us. And I'm just trying to get oriented around this issue. We've heard in our committee from a lot of people, a lot of letters from people who live in the vicinity, not only of your tanks, but the others. And I appreciate your being here, and I appreciate the candor of your presentation. And I also am grateful for you to, step forward and say, I agree with this, don't agree with this, we're doing that, and this and that. There were a number of the communications that we had from people in that area that asked specific questions about remedies. And I would just, to the extent that you're able to respond, I'd like to just share these 4 remedies that were suggested and get your perspective on whether they would work, whether they are something that you're amenable to, or whether you think that they would make sense. So if I can, I'll just read through them quickly, and then each one, maybe you can give me your perspective or not. The first was that measurements be made of actual emissions to define the problem and provide a basis for assessing mitigation efforts, not just industry reported calculations.
Yeah, I looked at Tom to sort of answer it. I think we are going to provide actual emissions data to the state already. I think Mr. Crawford mentioned that in their report, that's something that they're going to ask terminals to do. As I mentioned, Senator, back in 2012, 2013, again, when asked, we conducted actual emissions testing try to replicate, again, the east mount data. And so went through that process.
Okay.
Tom,
so-
I don't know if you have anything additional or different to add.
Yeah, I would just say, right, the whole issue with EPA was the difficulty in determining a method to test the emissions from tanks. As Jeff Crawford mentioned, a lot of the emissions are from that daily breathing. And so when a tank is breathing out, as it heats up, or when it's breathing in, it's at such a very low flow rate that you can't really measure the flow rate because of the just the mass of the flow rate and the variability of the flow rate. And so that was the main difficulty. So, yeah, it sounds perfectly reasonable to say, go test the tank, but it's really difficult in practice to do it.
But you'd be amenable to doing that in some fashion that you think makes sense, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, in fact, we're doing it, once our control system is in on our heated tanks, we're going to test them.
Great, thanks.
We'll be required to test them under the license.
Right, okay. The second proposal was that a plan be developed with the DEP to require stack testing that be incorporated at every facility on all tanks, heated and non-heated, at the time of their next license renewal, preferably before. Thoughts on that?
Well, same concerns as before. In order to test a stack, like on a tank, you have to know the flow rate. We do have stack testing, from the vapors we collect at our truck loading racks. They go to a treatment unit, and our current license requires that to be tested periodically to make sure we meet the limit in the license.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm assuming stack testing meant the control device at the loading rack, Senator, and we already perform actual testing for that, and that data is submitted to the DEP and EPA.
Great. The third one is that asking that the tank operators be required to install fence line monitoring around the perimeter of their facilities to provide continuous testing and to make that data available to the public. This would provide information about the effects on adjacent communities. Both fence line monitoring and stack testing, they say, represent reasonable expenses that should be borne by the companies as part of your permit to operate in the community. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I think, Tom's expressed it. I think the issue with fence line monitoring is the sources, whatever it might be picked up at a fence line, does not mean that the source is contained within that fence line. No different if you think of your home, fence in your house or your yard, and then put monitors at the four corners of your yard. It doesn't mean anything that's picked up there is actually emanating from your household. And so I would just express similar concerns. That being said, we absolutely support air monitoring and understanding what's in the air. But I just would be cautious that even if fence line monitoring is performed, that actually ascertaining the sources of what's in there is a whole different challenge. I think Mr. Crawford spoke to that a little bit, and certainly the individuals at the DEP are experts in air monitoring, but that would be my concern with doing that, Senator.
Do you have a concern with the drawing conclusions from what those tests show, but do you have a concern about whether your company, maybe working with some of the others, could bear the expenses as long as they're reasonable for the fence line monitoring?
On that, I think the word reasonable is probably the key. I think we'd want to see some proposal. Again, I think as a company, we've already voluntarily contributed money to an air monitoring effort, and so on an ongoing basis, if there was some reasonable proposal. Again, just for context, at the state, it was supposedly not picking on a particular industry. And as I already went through in terms of our facility in particular, and again, I can't speak for others in my industry directly, but just on EPA's own emissions data, the terminals are 1% of the VOCs. So if you're looking to do an air quality study or an air quality assessment, and you're going to focus on fence line monitoring of 1% of the source, it sort of belies the question what's going on in the other 99%.
Right.
All that being said, I do want to emphasize Global is willing to work with the state, with the committee, and with the DEP. And if there's a reasonable proposal, it's absolutely something we could take away and consider, including financially contributing to that effort.
And on that score, since you're an expert and you have to bear these expenses with your own family business, let me ask, the expenses that were presented for monitoring by the DEP, do those seem reasonable to you?
I'm not, not an expert. Tom could probably comment on the cost, but not surprising that a program that's been instituted, I think roughly, if I remember correctly, it looked like it was approaching $500,000, and that wasn't taking into account, DEP's own time, effort, sort of the sweat equity the department has to put into it. That's not surprising. As I said, I think what Maine and the DEP has instituted is very comprehensive, and we're not aware of a similar study sort of ongoing. I think it's a very comprehensive, multi-year effort that they're instituting.
So you and Tom, chime in, Tom, Mr. Keefe, if you agree. But you think that we're not paying exorbitant rates for the testing that we're getting at the state level?
No, I don't think so. In a study over that period of time, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. The final thing is, and I know others have some questions. The final request was that the DEP be directed to require all emissions to be treated in order to protect the community from the effects of the toxic chemicals. The preferred type of equipment for treating emissions are vapor recovery units, VRUs, as recommended by the EPA. Requirements for operation and maintenance of equipment should be included in their licenses. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so we, again, context is important. Our terminal doesn't handle gasoline. And so we have at other facilities, we run 21 of these other facilities around the country. We have VRUs or VCUs, and they are utilized to control emissions associated with gasoline. As I mentioned in my presentation, distillate products, the products that we handle at our terminal, are very low with respect to VOCs, very low with respect to the two compounds that were mentioned as potential concerns, the naphthalene and the acrolein. And so in Global's opinion, putting in what is a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment to control what are very, very low levels of emissions from distillate would be a disproportionate reaction. And again, you're only addressing 1% of the 100% that's out there. So with respect to that's not something that that Global would support at our terminal. At gasoline I'm sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, just trying to get clarity on this. So the question related to this particular technology that you're saying is more related to gasoline. Are there other technologies that could do the same thing that more appropriate for the kind of emissions that your tanks might be having?
I think as a general statement, again, to our knowledge, that's not something that's required in any of the other states that we operate as well. Just again, as context.
Well, that wasn't.
I think it was mentioned we have one of those control devices already on site that's utilized for switch loading. So if there's a truck that's come in that previously held gasoline, we do have a control device on site to take those fumes of gasoline and capture them. So it's with respect to distillate and the very low levels of VOCs associated with them.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and also your presence here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Representative Tucker has a question. Representative Tucker, you're on mute.
It's not a question. I basically want to make a comment about the suspicious circumstances of having the company invited. I know Mr. Bennett was concerned, and also Representative O'Connor. The fact is that
I have no concerns.
That the co-chairs of the committee are the ones who decided that we should have a briefing before the committee on this full report after looking at it and seeing how long it was and how important this issue was. At the same time, we thought it was a good idea not just to have the DEP, but to have other interested parties, particularly the city of Portland. And if we were going to let the city of Portland say something, we thought it incumbent upon us, in order to have a well-rounded presentation, that some of the affected businesses also be invited. And that was the basis of that invitation. Thank you.
I just want to say I have absolutely no concerns. I'm very grateful for the decision to invite people from the business community who are affected here. And as you heard, I had some good questions that I really wanted to share. So I'm glad to get that perspective. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have just a quick question I'd like to get some clarification on, Mr. Rumley and Mr. Keefe. You had a slide that talked about VOCs and the percent of occurrence in Cumberland County. Can you give me what your working definition is of a VOC?
Sorry, Tom, jump in if I get this wrong, but I think the definition of volatile organic compound is defined in the Clean Air Act. And so it would be those groups of compounds that are defined within that statute. And then, as Mr. Crawford said, the Maine has essentially adapted that and put in place a state implementation plan, so it'd be consistent with that. Tom, I don't know if you have anything more to add.
Yeah, I mean, the information that slide's based on is based on EPA's definition of a VOC. That slide was not something we made. It's from EPA.
And so you are aware that there are VOCs that are caused by humans and those that are naturally occurring, right?
Yeah, as that slide indicated, yeah.
Yep.
And that what the EPA was specifically bringing in front of us were levels of 2 compounds that they were concerned about that are VOCs, that are human derived, right?
Yes, the DEP, the acrolein and the naphthalene.
Naphthalene, right.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess I just want to make sure the committee's aware that when we look at what you're calling a 1% slice of the pie of VOCs, that we are all aware that there are other VOCs in the environment that are naturally occurring.
That's correct. There are natural sources of volatile organic compounds, just as there are man-made sources. So if you're concerned about volatile organic compounds and sources and impacts, it's important to take in all of those volatile organic compounds regardless of the source. That would be correct.
I think the committee is primarily concerned with the ones that are created by humans. Does anyone else have any other questions? All right, not seeing any. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming. We appreciate your time and your presentation, and we look forward to continuing to work together.
Thank you very much. Again, a huge thank you, and really welcome the opportunity both now and going forward.
I'm going to request that we take a 3-minute break, and we'll be back for the final presentation from the City of South Portland. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready for Mayor Pride. Are you with us?
I am, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate being invited to speak. I know this is a little irregular, and so having that opportunity is great. So thank you so much. And so before I begin my formal remarks, you know, I just want to emphasize that this is also somewhat personal to me. I have 3 young daughters growing up in the city of South Portland. Their daycare and school is on the same street I live on, and from my front yard, you can see a sea of tanks over the high school. I live near the high school. Senator Brenner, Representative Tucker, and esteemed members of the Environmental Natural Resources Committee, my name is Misha Pride, and it is my honor to serve as mayor for the city of South Portland. Our community is the 4th largest in Maine in terms of population at just over 25,000 residents, yet we're one of the smaller communities in Maine in terms of land area, measuring just over 12 square miles. This makes us one of the most densely populated communities in the state, with an average of 2,116 residents per square mile. This is relevant later on in my remarks. South Portland contributes to our state's economy in many ways, but for today, let us consider the fact that our city is home to 6 of the 11 marine oil terminals, and by far the largest concentration of tanks storing petroleum products located in the state of Maine. Nearly 150 tanks ranging in capacity from a few 100,000 gallons to over 11 million gallons line our waterfront and store a variety of petroleum products. These products are transported and used across the entire state to fuel our cars, buses, and trucks, heat our homes, schools, and hospitals, and pave our roads. This intense industrial use and benefit for the state has come at a price for South Portland residents. For years, my fellow residents have complained of unpleasant odors emanating from these facilities, odors so strong that they have had to close their windows and have not been able to enjoy their properties. Citizens report health maladies such as headaches, nausea, and breathing difficulties. In 2019, the city became aware of an ongoing investigation by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency into one of these facilities for alleged violations of their air emissions license. In 2020, a second company was alleged to have made similar violations. In both cases, the compliance issues were resolved through consent decrees with the US EPA and Department of Justice. The city was also able to obtain assurances from those terminal operators for the installation of odor control technology, and we are hopeful those will prove effective once operational. During this time, the City Council took immediate action to reach out to Maine Department of Environmental Protection and the Maine Center for Disease Control and hosted workshops so we could inform ourselves and our fellow residents as to the nature of the emissions and the related health impacts. Our residents demanded that the city take action as they felt that state and federal agencies were not sufficiently protecting their health and well-being. In response, the city partnered with Maine DEP officials to set up 5 fixed air monitoring stations across the city, with a 6th recently added. DEP also established a grab canister program that ran for 3 months, where interested residents were able to pick up a canister, take a quick air sample at their homes, and when they noticed odors, and submit those samples to the DEP for testing. We understand our joint efforts with the DEP in this regard have been the first of their kind in the state, and possibly even the nation. The City Council also formed the Clean Air Advisory Committee, comprised of health officials, scientists, engineers, and legal professionals, to provide recommendations to the city on assessing and improving air quality. That committee is a month away from wrapping up its work. During this process, former Senator and now Representative Rebecca Millett introduced legislation directing the DEP to A, study the methods for measuring and estimating emissions from the heated above ground storage tanks, B, study the best methods to control odors and other air emissions from all emission sources at oil terminal facilities in the state, not just the above ground heated storage tanks in South Portland. And C, issue a report of the findings made as a result of these studies. The CAAC has reviewed the DEP's report and, as a result, made several important and valuable recommendations to the City Council. I am pleased to present you the following list of 5 CAAC recommendations unanimously endorsed by the South Portland City Council. The city needs more information about the type and status of the numerous tanks in our community. While we have some information, such as the year built and type of product permitted to be stored in these tanks, we do not have other key pieces of information that can help us ascertain the potential for emissions from these tanks, such as A, are they riveted or welded? B, what is the condition of the interior walls? C, what types of seals are present? And D, what is currently being stored in which tanks? All of these considerations are important in determining an accurate emissions profile for the particular tank in question. For example, the uneven surface created by rivets can affect the effectiveness of floating tank roof to seal and result in increased emissions under certain conditions. The second recommendation, the city has concerns with allowing the facility operators to calculate their own emissions using the AP 42 methodology. There are a number of assumptions and variables included in these emissions calculations, and we recommend the DEP run the calculations themselves based on verified data, in addition to having companies make these calculations. This could be seen as an audit of sorts and help to address concerns around how these calculations were made in the past. The city would also like to see the DEP explore methods of measuring actual emissions from all tanks, for example, by considering the experiences of the Massachusetts DEP and US EPA with such measurement activities. When the third recommendation, when the storage tanks are emptied, the gas vapor that remains in the tank has to be removed before the storage tank can be cleaned and reused. The process is known as degassing. The DE report does not address the degassing process of tanks, which leads to the release of potentially toxic residual vapor produced by the previously contained volatile organic compounds. The city believes DEP should require vapor capture during degassing. Similarly, the report did not significantly address the use of cutter stock and products added to asphalt and number 6 fuel oil, nor did it mention the implications that the addition of such products may have on emissions. Cutter stocks are petroleum products used to thin oil and are typically used to reduce viscosity in heavier fuel oil products such as number 6 oil and asphalt. Although the terminal operators themselves may not add this cutter stock to their product, it could very well arrive at their facilities already added. The presence of cutter stock should be further investigated and analyzed. The fourth recommendation. As noted in my introduction, the city of South Portland is a very densely populated community. The proliferation of tank farms across our relatively small footprint and their proximity to the residences and schools is cause for concern. There does not appear to be a legal limit on how many tank operators could emit VOCs into the air in a community. While individual companies are limited in the VOCs they can emit, there is not a consideration for the cumulative impact of those emissions. In 2018, for example, the 6 tank farm operators were permitted to emit 594 tons of VOCs, though they report only emitting 188 tons. This seems significant, especially when several of these tank farms are within several hundred feet of one another, and especially given the proximity of these tanks to our various neighborhoods. We believe DEP should consider a regulatory approach that focuses on cumulative impact of these facilities. Related to the above, the fifth recommendation, we would like to see DEP consider how it would incorporate into its regulatory scheme a more explicit emphasis on the potential health impacts from these facilities. This could mean, among other things, taking into account the proximity of homes and schools when determining best practical treatment for any given applicant. In closing, the city believes that the suggested measures in the report do not go far enough to represent a significant improvement over existing regulatory practices. While we greatly appreciate the partnership between Maine DEP and the City of South Portland, and we realize the collection of data to inform this process is ongoing, we urge members of the ENR committee and legislature to pursue the above recommendations. We ask that you consider ways to help cement the support that Maine DEP provides local communities. We really appreciate the collaboration with the DEP, especially in this challenging year, and look forward to our continued partnership. We also ask that you consider all other steps necessary to ensure that the air in our great city is safe to breathe for the residents of South Portland and many workers and visitors. Thank you for your time and commitment. And I can answer some questions. I'll just remind everyone I'm not on the CAAC and nor am I a scientist, but I'm happy to respond to any comments or questions.
Representative Dudera.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you can give us a sense, Mayor Pride, on how many people this impacts. And obviously you brought up a good point with visitors coming. I mean, but how many residents, and then taking into account that this also affects the West End, the neighborhood in Portland, which is also affected. I'm just curious if you have an idea of that.
I mean, I can't give you numbers. I think one of the things that we should be looking at here is sort of the proximity that these tanks are to neighborhoods. I mean, there's a pretty large neighborhood right around, that terminal where Global and Sprague are, and it's pretty densely populated, as are all our communities in South Portland are relatively dense. We have that high population density, but I think the geography affects that area as well. We've talked at some of our meetings about sort of this cauldron effect that occurs because of the hills and the way I'm fortunate I live up on a ridge, but you go down towards the bay, you have these sort of this cauldron effect where a lot of these emissions potentially sort of seep together and can cause probably a higher concentration.
Representative Dudera, do you have a follow-up? Okay. Senator Bennett?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. The first is, Mayor, were you able to hear the questions I posed to the representative of Global?
Yes, I did.
So a lot of your constituents had posed that set of solutions to us, and they sound like they may overlap a little bit with what the city council has voted. But what did you think? Admittedly, they're one of several operators of tank farms in your community. But what did any response to the way they replied to those suggestions?
Yes, I mean, I think that their point is well taken, that they're one of many operators. And I think that that's kind of one of the points that the CAAC said, they're one of many operators. And so, when we might look at them as a single source and they may qualify for a certain level license, if we took the entire complex of the different operators and we put them together, if they were all one company, if all those tanks were owned by one company, would we be operating under the same license? I don't know that answer because I'm not an expert, but that's a question we need to ask. And if those licenses require a higher level of remediation, then that's something to consider in this whole thing.
Okay. Also, you mentioned that you want information about riveting and conditions of the tanks, that sort of thing. Isn't that within your purview of your code enforcement's office to get some of that information on real estate that is in your jurisdiction?
Well, I think that that may be correct, and that's something I'll have to look into. I don't think that they've been necessarily forthcoming with that information, and in the context of what we're looking at now, I'm not sure that they would have to give us all of that information as long as they got their license from the DEP.
Well, there's a lot of information that people don't have to give their governing authorities, but they do willfully. And you might start on those elements with just asking them, see what kind of response you get. That might be telling in and of itself as to, whether they are good partners with the city to provide that kind of basic information regarding things that you're taxing, right? You're taxing these as property. And I imagine they're paying decent amount of property taxes. And, you know, if there's deterioration and depreciation on those assets, I'm sure they're letting you know about that too.
That is a fair point.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Bennett. Representative Johansson.
Thank you, Senator Brenner. Mr. Mayor, are these tanks located on the coast or near the coast?
Absolutely.
Why are they clustered up on the coast?
Well, for some of them, it's because shipments come by boat. And so tankers are hooking up to nozzles that are piping various things, oil, into these tanks. Some of these boats come from South America, all over the place.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? I'm not seeing any. Mayor Pratt, I just want to thank you for not only joining us today and sharing your thoughts and that of the committee that you're representing, but also for your service to the city of South Portland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and represent my city and discuss this very serious issue. Thank you.
I believe we are at the end of our meeting for today. We do not have a meeting on Monday. It is a holiday. We will be back together on Wednesday. And the plan for Wednesday is to hear public testimony on LD 8 and LD 203. Any other housekeeping items? Not seeing any. I hope you all enjoy your lunch and your afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. We're adjourned.